Hello, today I'm going to be making a scene for you. And I'm not talking about causing a fuss in a restaurant or being a general pain in the bum in public. I'm talking about making something that's an image that tells a little story. Because the kind of mood I'm in and the way that is it lockdown? This weird thing we're under at the minute. Because of that, I've kind of had a couple of strange things going in my head. So I've had ideas related to things like Bioshock and Don't Starve Together and those sort of slightly horror-y, well, in the case of Bioshock, very horror kind of images and storytelling ideas. And also kind of wanted to draw a monster. Now, to be 100% honest with you, I had some problems taking this video. I had decided that I was going to use my old DSLR camera, which is Canon, Canon 1100D, and I'd not really used it for anything like this, and I didn't have a massively large memory card for it, so it kept cutting out while I was taking the video, which was not ideal because first off, the video it took was very sort of reddy orange, so I had to tweak it in the process afterwards, which is always a pain. It always makes things look a little bit grainy. And of course, there are bits of this video that are missing, which is just really annoying because I do really want to be able to show you guys every single part of what I'm doing. So what you'll see in this video is mainly me making a background. And it's not a big background, it's actually smaller than it was probably slightly smaller than A5. Or slightly around about A5 size. Let's say it's A5 size. And starting to draw a character to go in the background, which is going to be a young girl in sort of a nightie with a teddy bear. Unfortunately, most of me drawing half of me drawing the background and almost all of me drawing the monster have been, or at least the perceived monster, have been cut by my camera, which I find really frustrating. So this video isn't going to be so much about making a scene. It's going to be making an environment in conventional media and the beginning of a character again in conventional media. When I talk about conventional media, what I mean is I'm just using like physical paint, pencils, etc., rather than using a computer to build up the image that I'm looking for. In this case, I'm starting off drawing a very vague, the vague basics of a room with a doorway out of pencil, just normal pencil, and I've got an old watercolour set which I use quite regularly, and occasionally when I'm feeling particularly excitable I use up a colour and replace it with a single quarter pan, I think they're called, of watercolour. Now, I'm sure if you're an experienced watercolourist or if you've taken some lessons, you'll look at the way I'm doing this and just be like, oh my god, I'm horrified. But at the same time, what you'll see is that I am working from light colours. So I've got the pale yellows working through to darker blues and reds to make the environment that I'm trying to set this supposed scene in. What I'm doing a lot of is mixing the colours in a way I probably shouldn't, which is mixing the colours in actually on the paper itself rather than mixing them separately, because I find that when I mix them separately, when I make like a colour well, they either come out really, really watery, like too watery to be sensible to actually make the colour I want, or they come out, or I can't repeat the process. Whereas I find because the way watercolour works, that you can actually use whatever's there, so you can, even if the colour you are trying to mix isn't quite working, you can sort of gradient it into another colour. Oh, gradient it. You can fudge it, so but you can make it look as if it's supposed to be like that, particularly in this sort of environment I'm trying to make, which is a horror scenario environment. So the room is supposed to look dark and murky. I've got light coming in through the doorway, so obviously there's a window somewhere beyond the doorway, but we can't actually see where that is. And the room we're in is still quite murky, but it's got you can see there's wallpaper peeling off, or you will be able to see there'll be wallpaper peeling off the walls, etc. Yeah, it is tricky. I really enjoy drawing and painting and creating interior scenes. Well, not scenes even. I quite like drawing corners in rooms and things like that. That's something that I do a lot. So I'll draw. I quite like cityscapes as well. I'm not really a big plants and animals kind of person, but I quite enjoy drawing slightly grotty rooms and that sort of thing. So this is quite fun for me because I wanted this to be a fun thing to do for me as well as you. One of the other things I've got to mention was that I'll be using, in addition to normal pencils and watercolours, I've actually got a set of watercolour pens that I got from one of these cheap website type places. I just wanted to see if they worked or not. And they're actually quite fun to work with. They're brush pens, and it's in a range of sort of watercolour things. And you can get brushes that they're like the handle fills with water, and you can use them that way. But I'm just using them as an addition, so I can get slightly finer lines for when I'm doing like the detail. So you'll see on the where I'm drawing skirting board on the room, I've just put a little line of dark reddish brown and just smudged it out a little bit, and it just gives it a little bit more definition, so I've got a little bit more control with it, because watercolour is great, but sometimes you have to wait for it to dry off before you can actually put before you can put the next layer of paint on, because if you put wet on wet, sometimes it sort of bleeds into one another. It's quite a nice way to start off with wet on wet with watercolour. So you put water on the paper first, then you put the colour into where that water is, and it makes these sort of lovely blooms of colour. Anyway, I digress, as I often do. What I've been doing here is actually using a liquid white watercolour. So basically you get watercolour out of a tube, just to add a little bit, some highlights where I didn't leave any white paper. So like where the light would hit the door jamb or the thing, and where the light would hit outside of the lit area of the floor in the other room, so the one we can glimpse through the door. If you are getting a little, for example, the one I use is a travel kit, watercolour kit. If you get a watercolour travel kit, it is really worth buying a separate tube of white watercolour paint, because you will find you don't need it for that sort of thing. Or start practicing masking out areas where you want to leave white. So, and you can use what's things that you can use for that. Some people use copy decks, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. The best stuff to get really is it's called masking fluid, and you can there's a couple of different brands of that. And it's just a case of like use a toothpick, or you can get special brushes and applicators for it, but a toothpick is quite a handy little thing to carry around anyway. You can use that, just dip a bit in, put it on. It's like rubbery stuff, and you just peel it off after your paint's dried. Yeah, so the other thing you can use, if you are doing watercolour painting, is you can have a couple of tubes of gouache, which is basically a thicker kind of watercolour paint. It's a bit like poster paint, only you don't have to mix it up from powder. It's a thick poster type paint. And it has some of the same properties of watercolour, but it tends to be more opaque than watercolour. So it is possible after you've done a painting that you can go back in and use the paler colours just to add highlights or a bit of definition or what have you. So that's quite handy as well. But the basics, I would say, would be some kind of small watercolour set and a tube of white watercolour paint. Here you can see I'm trying to add a bit of texture and detail to the walls of the room that I've drawn here, and basically trying to add in a few shadows so it looks as if the paper's starting to come off the walls, details that make it look at details as though to make it look as though it's ripped the wallpaper. Just generally trying to make it look a bit more spooky and a little more grotty, like an abandoned building. This is the bit that tends to take the longest, I have to admit, because the starting bit is just laying down the basic colours and shapes. So it's these little details that are tricky to get in, so you're kind of trying to figure out how it looks. And I often work with how the paint's gone down as I've done it already, so I tend to put it in quite loosely to start with. And then if there's slightly darker areas, those will be the bits that I darken even further to make the shadows. And I try and work with what's already there, because I find that if I put too many details in right at the beginning, it just doesn't look right. It tends to look kind of forced, more like something that's been, what's the word? What's a good word? It doesn't look as natural. Whereas if you go with where the paint's just naturally gone a bit thicker or naturally gone a bit thinner, and use those for where your higher bits of texture are and your lower bits of texture are, I think it tends to look more natural because it hasn't been put there intentionally. It's, as if you were actually watching a room, and become more and more, dishevelled as it gets older and has been abandoned longer. I think it tends to do that in a more organic way. You don't have it going, oh, this bit X, Y, Z happens at this particular moment, what have you. There's always a certain amount of, well, this has slightly thicker wallpaper, and the bugs like the wallpaper a little bit more because it's tasty to them, and you'll have this bit of the wall will have had a tendency to have a bit more moisture because the light didn't hit it as much as it did on another bit. Those sort of weird things that you can't necessarily predict, and that's how painting tends to work better, I find. Obviously, there are certain places it's more likely to go. So, for example, the edges of wallpaper are more likely to be ripped off or damaged first. Around the corners of the rooms, around the edges of the rooms, you're going to get build-ups of dirt and general detritus and what have you. You're going to find that if you've got carpet down, where people walk more is going to look more worn and dirtier, those sort of things. But those sort of things you start with in general, and then you go down to the specifics. And I tried to do that as if I was being led by what's already there rather than leading my paint to be in one place or another. So it's a bit Bob Ross, but he's popular and successful because of because of those sort of reasons. Because he does actually look at the thing and go, do you know what? We're working with what we got here. We can do this, and we can make something that we like. And that's what it comes down to. As I've said in my other videos, what it comes down to is you are trying to create something you like. I'm trying to create something I like, and no one can say, oh, this is wrong or this is right, because art isn't about wrong and right. Art is about what feels good to you at the time. We're about to change from this into the bit that my camera forgot. So anything there, and now is when we, as you can see, we've now got a much darker wallpaper, and now there's even a pattern on the wall. But enough of this background frivolity and scenery painting. Onward to our first character, and possibly the only one you'll get to see me paint. What I'm doing here is propping up my scenery painting so that I can actually see where the light's coming from and try and get the right kind of lighting for my characters. Because if you don't bear that in mind, it's going to look weird if you forget and then you've got light on your characters from the left, but it turns out that all the light in your background is from the right, or that sort of thing. So it's just to keep it straight in my head. And I keep that where I can see it while I change the paper so I can get on with drawing the first character. With hindsight, I'll be 100% honest and say probably I should have done all this much larger, but I'm still a bit nervous of being on camera myself, so this is partially me trying to make it small enough that I can get it in a nice tight focused video without accidentally sticking bits of myself in the video itself, if that makes sense. In my own defence, of course, I'd like to say that this is completely off the cuff, this thing. I haven't got an overarching plan for this piece of work. It's not even part of a series or anything like that. It was just, I woke up and thought, oh, what should I do today? And this quilt sort of came about. And probably I should have planned it out a bit more, had a bit more of a narrative intent, or, or a set endpoint or something, but I'm not the most organised person in the world, if I'm entirely frank with you. And I think a lot of us can empathise with that because, I don't know, man, these are tricky times and all. But I don't know, it's quite fun for me to just flick around. The amount of time I'm spending on sketching this out is unusual for me because normally I would do the vaguest of vague stuff and then leap in and see what happens. But, this is a combination of off the cuff, and so a combination of cuff and probably slightly too rigid behaviour because I'm still not 100% sure what people want from, or what my USP is at the minute. So I'm still trying to find that all out. It'd be nice to have a few comments if you watch the videos, to have a couple of comments, see what sort of things you might be interested in me doing, what might be a good project, or just silly things. So tips and tricks, best places to get stuff, that sort of thing. I don't know, and I'm willing to have a go at most things. I'm not frightened of challenging myself, or indeed being challenged by anyone else. So yeah, leave comments underneath this video. Let me know what might be interesting to do in future, what might be important to avoid in the future, that sort of thing. And, click like, click subscribe, put your notifications on so you know when our next videos are about, and do that. I'm not entirely sure why I decided to paint this nutty pink on this girl, because it's a bit gender conforming for my tastes, but hey, it's quite nice. It's not actually pink, it's actually really, really watered down crimson, so I comfort myself with that. But the crimson It's actually crimson 90, just really, really pale. Okay, it's not pink, it's just really, really pale crimson. Some people might consider that having a child in this sort of horror scenario is a bit, well, apart from the fact that it's been overdone and stuff, there's also the whole thing about, well, you know, children, young, innocent, da 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 da. And I think anyone who's ever had a child possibly realizes that at some point that child is going to freak you the hell out. For example, one thing that most sort of toddlers to sort of 5-year-olds do is they will wake up very, very early in the morning or in the night. They will come and toddle into your room and they will just stare at you until you wake up. And there's nothing quite as terrifying as waking up and seeing someone staring at you really close to your face. And I myself have been shocked awake, I think is the nicest way of putting it. There may have been swearing involved, which I often regretted later. But yeah, I mean, children can be scary. I mean, just Google images of kids who, you know, the number of parents who have like nanny cam baby monitors and stuff like that. You just Google the videos of that sort of thing and see what the babies and children look like in the middle of the night. And you'll agree with me, kids can be absolutely freaking terrifying. Another technique you'll see me using here is basically a blotting technique. So you put paint onto your canvas or your, in this case, paper. I'm actually using multimedia paper for this. I'm not sure it's quite as heavy duty as I need, but that's just one of those things. Anyway, what was I saying? Yes, so the blotting technique. So what it is you put quite watered down colour onto the paper, and then you can blot some of it off. So there's two different ways of doing this. This way of controlling the build-up of colour on your paper, but it's also a thing you can use to make texture in your paper. So for example, if you're doing a painting with a watercolour painting with a large amount of sky in it, you can actually put a huge wash of whatever your basic sky colour is on it, and then start making clouds by blotting out just the areas you want to be a paler colour. And you can do that, as I say, you can build that up in layers. So you can make the clouds look, or bits of the clouds look almost translucent. It's a really nice effect to use. In this case, I'm just using a bit of kitchen towel just to blot up things. Some people use sponges, some use, I think you can get special blotting, like colour erasers or something they're called, I can't remember. But I just use a bit of kitchen towel or whatever I've got on me. If I've got a bit of cloth, sometimes I use that. It depends. And of course, depending on the texture of what you use, will change the texture of the blotting you use. So if you're using something like a natural sponge, you'll have more of a textured blotting effect. So you'll have like bits where it won't have absorbed some of the colour because that's where like the holes in the natural sponge are. So yeah, so it's quite a nice little, quite versatile technique. It's quite fun. If you don't like getting your hands dirty, then I suggest not using paint. Full stop. But yeah, no, it's it's okay. It's quite a nice one, and as I say, it's a good way of controlling how much paint and how much colour you've got in any particular area. I've started to draw the monster here, but unfortunately my camera's about to cut out again, so I think this is as good a time as any to start finishing the video. So like, subscribe, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.